is what we can call the food crisis. What do we understand when we talk about what is known as the food crisis, and how is that leading to what you can call the Black Sea Grain Initiative? Okay, now let's say, for example, very simply, if I take a look at this kind of a chart, if I take a look at the largest exporters of wheat in the world, okay, then they go like this. Russia is indeed the largest exporter of wheat of the world. We're not talking about producers but exporters. Then there is the European Union. Then there is Canada. Then there is USA. And the fifth largest exporter of wheat in the world is Ukraine. A very simple estimate of how wheat export happens, which means to say that Russia plus Ukraine they form the largest exports of wheat in the world put together. Right, this is what I'm in a way giving you as a point for the prelims examination. Russia plus Ukraine, they form the largest exports of wheat in the world, and for this reason they are also known as the bread basket of the world. You see the point? Russia plus Ukraine, they form the largest, what you can say, exports of wheat in the world, and that is why they are known as the bread basket of the world. Russia is number 1, Ukraine is number 5, but both of them put together, they are known as the bread basket of the world. And the root, let's say imports from these areas, or importers of the wheat of Russia and Ukraine, are largely made by countries like this. Please take a note of this: Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, UAE, and Indonesia. These are what you can say the largest importers of wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Right, so just take a look at this kind of a bit of a arrangement. The exports of wheat are made by Russia and Ukraine, and the imports, they are the largest exporters of wheat, and the markets in which this wheat is sold most prominently is Egypt, Sweden, Tunisia, UAE, and Indonesia. Right, so in region terms, the wheat is exported like this: in Africa, Southeast Asia, and West Asia. These are the 3 regions in which wheat is exported by the Russians and the Ukrainians combined, meaning this entire thing. And if you want to put a little bit of an addition to this entire activity, to ask a very simple question and follow up: what is the route by which this follows? The route by which this wheat follows, how this is distributed in the international market, and the route is of course Black Sea. Right, so we have seen how Black Sea, you can enter into the Strait of Bosphorus, and then you can go to the Sea of Marmara, and then you have the Strait of Dardanelles, and then from Dardanelles you have the Mediterranean Sea. And by reaching the Mediterranean Sea, you can access the markets of Africa, West Asia, and further move to Southeast Asia, countries like Indonesia. You see, just take a look at this, what I'm trying to in a way elaborate for you here. We're trying to understand what is known as food crisis, and also corresponding to the food crisis, what is known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which is what I discussed yesterday briefly, taken by the United Nations. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, as it is taken up by the United Nations. So we are taking a look at that part briefly, and our understanding and imagination with this is to get a sense of how the war in Russia and Ukraine is creating a kind of a blockade, a kind of a stop complete movement of the movement of the wheat from this entire region into the others. So what we see basically is that once a blockade has been imposed on the Black Sea, that Russian and Ukrainians have in a way given warnings to each other that no amount of movement in the Black Sea is going to be looked upon as a friendly movement. So any movement made by ships into this region is going to be struck out as a kind of a activity which is going to make the presence of the Russians or Ukrainians in Black Sea felt like a hostility, right? That's what basically what we're going to take a look at in terms of thinking of it as a blockade of the Black Sea. So we are looking at this particular problem, that if you take supply of wheat which is given by these countries, Russia plus Ukraine, and if you completely cross out the supply, right, if you cross out the supply of Russia and Ukraine, these markets, right, they, what you can say, experience a crude deficit of supply, and therefore their traditional suppliers, which are Russia and Ukraine, are out of the picture because of the blockade. And this results directly into food crisis, especially for countries like Sudan and Tunisia, who will not be able to buy wheat at a higher price. Okay, so this is what basically is simply elaborated as what we can understand as a food crisis, that the reason why the Russians and the Ukrainians, that they have blockaded the Black Sea, and Black Sea is the only way that you can move into the markets of Africa, West Asia and Southeast Asia. The areas in Black Sea, for example, are blockaded by the Russian and the Ukrainians for each other in terms of their civilian movement. And because of this kind of a blockade, Egypt, countries like Sudan and Tunisia, which are the poorer countries, low income countries in these areas, they are not able to match the rising prices of wheat because a supply from the market has been drawn out. Now you know what happens with regard to the demand supply equation. If the demand is constant and supply is dropped down significantly, then prices shoot up. And when the prices shoot up, the countries which have the ability to buy the expensive wheat from other suppliers, they can buy it, but the countries which don't have that kind of a purchasing power parity, those countries suffer what is known as an acute food crisis. So that's how basically you can say that how the activities which happened in Russia and Ukraine eventually led to the food problems or the food shortages, food crisis in the countries like Sudan and Tunisia. And that's what basically we understand as a food crisis. And a kind of a solution which was provided or offered for some time on this food crisis was the United Nations had spoken to Turkey, because Turkey is an important country by which these areas are connected, and to move through the Black Sea region, You have to cross the Bosphorus and Dardanelles. Both of them are under the control of the Turks. So with regard to this, United Nations and Turkey, United Nations reached out to Turkey, and Turkey tried to settle a kind of a truce between the Russians and the Ukrainians. A kind of an agreement or truce was allowed between Russia and Ukraine to let to allow wheat exports to the international market in the middle of the ongoing war. So they agreed that wheat exports to the international markets will not be impacted for the purposes of the ongoing war, right? And this basically became known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But since 2023, the Black Sea Grain Initiative lies completely dead, as Russia has refused to renew it. So the Black Sea Grain Initiative lies completely dead since 2023, as Russia has walked out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So currently also the areas of Black Sea are not open for any kind of a wheat supply. And also this led to, for example, countries like India. So these countries, for example, Sudan, Tunisia, UAE, Indonesia, these countries started looking at India to supply the gap by which food security can be assessed. India calculated the entire situation, and India took a decision that to safeguard itself from international markets and the possibility of a food problem in India, Indian government decided to put a ban upon the export of wheat from India. That ban has been put by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and that ban continues to exist even today. So in India, we don't have an open export of wheat today. Wheat export is highly regulated by the government, and we currently operate under a prohibition in terms of exporting of wheat. So that was a decision taken by the government of India in that regard. So to be able to not be taken for a bit of a problem because of this situation, the government of India has introduced what is called a export ban. So this is a bit of a current update which is related to this idea. So you take two questions, the 2 points about it: the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the imposition of an export ban on the export of wheat by India with regard to what is happening in this particular region specifically.